Oil or crude oil is a fossil fuel. It is the result of transforming organic materials into hydrocarbons over millions of years, generally buried in the form of deposits. Crude oil sometimes appears on the Earth's surface, which is why it has been known since ancient times. Around the world, oil was used as a sealing material in construction and for medical purposes. However, it wasn't until the mid-19th century that its consumption would explode. Europe and North America, in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, had rapidly increasing energy demands, which were primarily met by coal. Interest in oil grew worldwide, from the Russian Empire to Europe to North America, where the first modern drilling site was established. In the United States, this caused a black gold rush, and the country became the world's largest oil producer. Initially, refined oil replaced whale oil for lighting lamps. It provided better thermal value than coal and was easier to transport than gas. Oil consumption rose in the early 20th century, especially in transportation, with the development of automobiles, the reactivation of ship engines, and the flourishing of aviation during World War I. Once extracted, crude oil is distilled in a refinery to separate hydrocarbons as needed. Lighter molecules vaporize at the top of the distillation column, where the temperature is around 20 degrees Celsius. Liquefied petroleum gases are collected and used, among other things, in lighters and kitchens. Between 30 degrees Celsius and 105 degrees Celsius, gasoline is produced for cars. Between 105 degrees Celsius and 160 degrees Celsius, naphtha is created, which is used in petrochemicals to produce plastics, synthetic textiles, medicines, and cosmetics. Between 160 degrees Celsius and 230 degrees Celsius, kerosene is obtained for aviation. Between 230 degrees Celsius and 425 degrees Celsius, diesel is produced for cars, and heating oil is created for domestic use. Finally, thick, high-sulfur residue is heated to over 450 degrees Celsius to form heavy fuel oil used by ships and asphalt for road and roofing construction. Crude oil is transported in barrels with capacity of 42 U.S. gallons, or just under 159 liters. Thus, the barrel became the standard unit for oil pricing. Oil discoveries were made increasingly worldwide, including in Venezuela, which became the second largest producer. In the Middle East, Western companies, including Britain, seized a new market, giving a portion of their profits to the local countries through royalties. During World War II, demand for oil shale became a significant international issue. At the end of the war, the United States made an alliance with Saudi Arabia to guarantee the country's security in exchange for preferential access to its oil. Western companies, which dominated oil markets, contributed to nationalist movements in producing countries. In Saudi Arabia, an agreement was signed allowing the country to receive 50% of the oil profits. In Iran, negotiations with the Anglo-Persian Oil Company failed, and later the prime minister nationalized the country's oil. In response, the United States and the United Kingdom secretly organized a coup to overthrow the prime minister. The Shah of Iran remained in power and allowed the exploitation of the country's oil by a consortium of Western companies. In the Soviet Union, the discovery of oil fields in Western Siberia led the country to invest in their exploitation. Oil, abundant and cheap, overtook coal and became the world's primary energy source. Even then, its price was still under $3 per barrel. 5 major oil-producing countries decided to unite to extract more benefits. They created OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Together, they wanted to challenge the dominance of Western companies, increase oil prices, and have a common policy. New countries gradually joined the organization. In 1972, U.S. oil production peaked, and it was forced to import oil to meet its growing needs. As the United Kingdom withdrew from the Middle East, security in the region was provided by Iran and Saudi Arabia, armed by the West. After the Yom Kippur War between Israel and the Arab countries of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, OPEC first used oil as a political weapon, imposing an oil embargo on Israel's allies and slowing production to inflate oil prices. This was the first oil crisis to hit industrialized countries, whose economies had become heavily reliant on black gold. Countries tried to reduce their oil consumption and invested in alternatives, such as nuclear and hydroelectric energy, or reinvested in coal. Oil companies, in turn, explore the world in search of new deposits. Offshore sources, known as maritime sites, were discovered and exploited, especially in the North Sea. The Soviet Union became the world's largest oil producer, while in the United States, production increased with the exploitation of Alaskan oil. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution took place. The Shah's regime was overthrown and replaced by an Islamic republic that adopted an anti-Western policy. Oil production in the country fell, causing the second oil crisis. After border disputes and tensions between Iran and Iraq led to 8 years of war, oil production from non-OPEC countries surpassed that from OPEC countries. From then on, oil prices were determined by supply and demand, rather than OPEC. However, for industrialized nations, the stability of the Middle East remained a priority. As Iran and Iraq began targeting oil installations in the Persian Gulf, hundreds of Western military ships entered to ensure the continued supply of oil. At the end of the war, Iraq was weakened and indebted to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. After receiving large quantities of military equipment, the country had the strongest army in the region. Iraq took advantage of the situation to invade Kuwait after a border dispute. An international coalition, under the United Nations and led by the United States, intervened to neutralize the Iraqi army. This time, the United States established a permanent presence in the region by installing military bases and signing defense agreements with Gulf monarchies. The U.S. imposed a series of sanctions on Iran and Iraq, which it considered rogue states. Saudi Arabia, for its part, wanted to once again become a major oil producer. The country has the largest known oil reserves in the world and flooded the market to become the largest producer of crude oil. In Russia, new investments revived the oil industry, but with low oil prices, overseas operations were unprofitable and oil companies found themselves in difficulty. In 1998, they began merging and combining forces. 6 oil giants were born, becoming the wealthiest and most influential companies in the world. In the Middle East, the U.S. military presence began to stir concerns. On one hand, Islamic extremists did not want an Israeli ally on their land. On the other hand, some viewed the sanctions imposed on Iraq and Iran as too heavy. On September 11, 2001, the United States became the target of a major terrorist attack on its soil. 15 out of 19 terrorists were Saudi nationals, raising serious concerns. The United States actively sought new sources to reduce its dependence on Saudi oil. In Africa, production accelerated after the discovery of large offshore fields in the Gulf of Guinea.